Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. You might also be listening to this in the Writing from the Womb podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sama Morningstar, and I have Rachael Amber with me here today. Thank you so much for joining us, Rachael. I met Rachael when a friend of mine was posting about your cycles journal, which is something that I've been dreaming about creating for over 20 years and looking for, every year when I would be looking for some kind of a planner, I wanted one that had the menstrual cycle tracking guidelines or space in there for menstrual cycle tracking that was organized and supportive of that, and also the lunar cycles, and that those that was all featured in there with, I was fantasizing about, for a long time I tried to make round papered, wheels and all this kind of stuff because the square book doesn't, that those cycles don't seem to fit in there. So when my friend posted this and was so enthusiastic about it, I just had to get one. And I was looking specifically for something like that to put as a reference for a supplemental resource to use alongside the Herbal Womb Wellness workbook that I'm publishing this fall too, or actually in the next month. I guess it's not fall anymore. It's winter time.
Wow.
It might be more winter where you are. It still feels like fall here to us in California. But so so I just was so inspired by this and ordered my copy and got my copy and wanted to get involved in what you're offering and get on here and invite you on here. So I'm so glad that you are interested in collaborating and sharing with more and more people about this, and you're willing to come on the podcast. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself more and share about what inspired you. I'm imagining your personal womb-centered healing journey has informed and inspired and motivated the creation of this beautiful cycles journal, which includes some beautiful artwork, womb artwork by you, I am understanding. So I would love to hear about that creative process for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here. It kind of birthed itself very rapidly in my mind, or yes, it was also something that I'd been seeking in the world and couldn't find. And it sort of began as something I was just like, oh, I'll create for myself a little chart. And then I'm just always ambitious and like to make it really beautiful and interactive. And as I was telling people what I was making, I realized there was a need for it in the world, and that it could sort of fill a gap where, since we live in such a world where we plan and track and follow so many things, but often the work-related side of life comes before our own inner needs and cycles. And I think it definitely also came from wanting a place to put everything in one place, so that I could follow the multiple inner and outer cycles that influence myself and others in everyday life. And because I was following my cycles in my head and on apps and in all different places, and simultaneously using lunar calendars and tracking my nutrition and tracking my sleep and all these cycles that impact all of us. And I would start to see overlaps or notice them when they were most intense, or when I was a little too late to realize that I needed space or something, in terms of like, well, for example, I had one year where I only noticed some of the overlaps because it was so intense, because I was bleeding on the full moon for 12 months straight. And that kind of sparked it within me that there's more to this than we often give credit for, or just notice, because we're often so busy in the external world that we forget to tune in or make these connections. And it's no one's fault at all. It's just, but there are beautiful connections out there to be merged and noticed, and so that we can understand more of ourselves. So I think it was really mostly a place to keep it all together and to help find patterns and shifts and reflect and also drop in, because, well, as an artist, I really love tactical, physical things, but I also would find that with the apps, I didn't feel as grounded in them, and it felt a bit more scattered. And I still do use some apps, but I think having a journal companion or having a physical aspect to tracking really grounded me and helped me get out of my head and into my body, and helps it feel more like a ritual than just kind of another to-do. Like tracking my cycle then became something I wanted to do, and that I then gave me so much wisdom and insight into the signs that my body was trying to let me know and clue me into, but that I was not noticing or just hadn't written down to analyze and compare. And so the patterns just kind of started to reveal themselves once I paid more attention. And yeah, it's been a journey of healing and noticing and tuning in and listening to my body. And I'm still learning and growing with it every day, but it's just become a much better relationship as I've given my body more credence instead of only listening to what the world needs of me or what my brain thinks I need, and just living a life more cyclically instead of linearly. And yeah, I could go on forever about it, but that's kind of the foundations.
Yeah, I can go on forever about it too. And a couple of questions I have, or at least the first question coming up for me about that is when you mentioned starting to notice the patterns revealing themselves as you got deeper into your cycle tracking journey with this cycles journal that you created, and I'm imagining you're using, it sounds to me like you created it for yourself. So even though you made it this book that you're selling to thousands of people around the world, or at least hundreds of people, I know I was like pre-order number 297, so I don't know how many total orders you had, but you're selling it, you're making it for all these people, but you're using it yourself. And it sounds like it started to reveal over the years. I'm curious, first of all, how many years you've been using this journal that you've created, and what were some of the patterns that started to become apparent that made you aware that perhaps you needed to make different kinds of choices for your own womb healing? Like did you get to a point where you're like, this is a message, I'm decoding this message from my womb and it's asking me for something different, just out of the tracking process that you were doing and the wisdom, because it's not just tracking, there's this wisdom that you've gathered about the womb in the book as well. So I'm curious, what were some of the early discoveries and how that's evolved for you over time?
Yeah. Well, first, yes, this is the third year it's been self-published by me, and each year has been such an involvement. So it simultaneously feels like it's been forever, but also it's such a new thing still. But the beauty of that is that I still get to evolve it and listen to feedback. And yes, while I did originally make it for myself and it is still for myself, it's simultaneously for everyone. And that's why I love being able to self-publish, because I can really listen to feedback and integrate what we all generally need. Even if I can't hit every dot, I try to cover as much as possible. And yeah, gratefully it's reached so many people now as it's expanding and helping us around the world, which is so special and I'm so grateful for. But yeah, there are so many patterns. There's very specific ones that have spoken to me, as well as like more general patterns and just like everyday wisdom and it's also not only, yes, from the womb and from my body, but at a larger scale, like messages from nature and from, yeah, just the connective energy around all of us. So listening to all those messages and tuning into my womb and realizing that that's the seat of where all this wisdom has been coming from all along. When I feel that gut feeling, it really being in my womb, I feel like just patterns of my body reminding me to slow down, and a lot of learning lessons through multiple cycles, and sometimes the hard way when, you know, it takes multiple cycles for me to, you know, I might notice it one cycle, but then to actually start integrating it and adjusting my life to match that. So for example, day 20 and 21 are always specifically very difficult for me. And I find that as I am descending deeper into the luteal phase, my body is asking for more, you know, to slow down, for more time, more space, more time in nature, more solitude, and less time maybe in front of the computer and working. And it's, you know, you're slowly turning inward and deeper inward. Um, and so my womb is always asking for that space and just to be outside and in slower energy. And then when not listened to, it can manifest in, you know, just tension or, you know, untrue communication that comes out with emotions. And so really listening to that has been an involvement. And there's, yeah, I could go into many different patterns, but I'm wondering if you want me to keep going with
Well,
that.
yeah, that particular one. So I'm curious if you can tell us a story about that first aha moment
Mm-hmm.
when you started to notice that it was on these specific days
Mm-hmm.
from using your cycle tracking journal and like writing. What did you write down about how you were feeling on those days? Like, what were the words that you wrote down that you noticed? Oh, I wrote the same words on those days
Yeah.
this month. I wrote the same words on these days. Wow, look at that. So I really want to hear that specific
Yeah.
of a story so that, you know, people who are getting into this journey can start to notice these things for themselves too.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so yeah, the beauty of having it on paper is that you can look back and see that. I mean, of course, you can do that on an app as well, but I feel like my intuition would always spark and be like, realize almost like deja vu, like I've written this before in some regard, whether the energy was the same or the words were the same. And space was always like needing space was always written there. And I would see in the symptom tracking part of the journal that anxiety was high and just like most of my emotions were very heightened, and even sometimes joy was heightened, but then there were also simultaneously the other side of that, like irritability was heightened. And so it was just general heightened energy. And I use some of my own like techniques or codes in there, and so I'll put like a star if it was an extra like potent day, whether that be good or bad, but I think they're all kind of just potent is just is intense energy, so it can be both or either. And a lot of times it was uh, miscommunications with my partner has always been one of the biggest signs that of me not being true to myself and other, because I'm distracted by the intensity of not giving myself what my body's asking for. And so that manifests in other ways, such as like, yeah, just it's often the days that those arguments occur because I haven't been taking care of myself. And I can reflect on that because of what I write and how it's not that one person would start it or the other. It's just that like my I just noticed that it was something from within me that was different that day. You know, it was like my feelings about the world were through like almost like a fogged lens of anxiety and tension. And so when I would step back, and I would also write about then the flip side of it, like what would come after that, like usually such a revelation of it simply, I mean, simply, but also in this world, it's so it's complex in some regard, or it feels complex to give ourselves the space or to just like go in the woods and just sit there and do nothing or just be, which is, you know, so hard in this modern day, and or so hard to get ourselves to do or believe is the medicine sometimes. And so that was a lot of what would be there on that day. Or and then sometimes, so that would be when it was like linked to a certain day of my cycle, and I would look back and see that. But another example is linked to the lunar cycle as well. So sometimes I see patterns linked to both, and sometimes I see patterns linked to a certain one. Like, and I think many folks can relate that the full moon is always an intense time, and especially when it's linked, depending on which phase of your cycle you're in, it could be intensified or it can manifest differently. So when I was bleeding on the full moon all the time, that was just I feel like very, very intense emotionally, but also physically, as opposed to if I'm ovulating on the new moon or the full moon. I feel like that those times have been more, um, it almost felt like less of the opposite energy. So, because like with the full moon, it's so open and outward. And then when I was bleeding, it was like my body wanted to go within. So it was like these two poles, and everyone experiences it differently. But for me, I felt like it was such a revelatory time. Yeah.
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 Well, I have a couple of questions. One is I'd love to hear more about this year of bleeding on the full moon, because I'm curious um, what you feel in retrospect that was about for you. Um, was there something going on for you that, as you look back on that time, you realize now that that was some, it sounds like an initiatory experience, that
Mhm.
so few of us really have that kind of regularity and have that um, kind of syncing up with the lunar cycle, given all the disruptions to the natural lighting in our lives and all the various influences to that. So having that on the full moon, and there's very, very specific archetypes about bleeding on the full moon that feel like a powerful initiation perhaps was happening for you. And I'm curious what was leading up to that, and what you feel it was about for you. And as you look back on it, what came out of that time.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It did feel like a very revelatory and initiative experience. Like it, uh, yeah, I feel like it was, as someone who has felt, I'm a very outwardly emotional person. I have a Cancer sun. I've always felt my emotions very deeply and not been afraid to express them. But I think simultaneously with society and upbringing and lots of different factors, there's been this imbalance of expression, but also restraint or intensity. So I feel like the bleeding on the full moon brought all of that already there. And then the intensity of bleeding and turning inward and releasing with such a peak of the lunar cycle and of just illumination and an energy of outwardness, which I feel like it was inviting me to, I almost feel like I was meant to feel the intensity of pain, and because through painful experiences comes transformation when we get to the other side, and when we can sit in the pain and realize the more present we are with it, the more we can learn from it. And um, because, okay, so for example, I think one big lesson from that was that we have physical pain often during our cycles, but then our mindset can intensify that or lessen it whether we are present or not. And of course there are different factors, but the more I experienced that and had to also work with my mindset of a lot of the womb healing and menstrual awareness work has also been with how mentality, but also how we were taught to think about our bodies and menstruation, and also how we've internalized that. So for me personally, it was realizing that there was a war going on inside me, that my mind was against my body. It either didn't listen to my body, or it didn't believe my body, or it just thought that what was going on up there, what was going on in the world, was more important. And so this time of intensity of really painful cycles of consistency, but it wasn't all bad. It was just intense, I'll say, but it really like woke me up, because sometimes until things are intense, we don't see it, or we keep ignoring it. Or at least for me, like, yeah, got to learn the lessons multiple times. And since I wasn't as tuned in at that time, I was tuning into the lunar cycle more at that time, and I was exploring different modes of divination and spirituality. And I've always been a very spiritual person, but it's been so many avenues of exploration. And I feel like through that, it really brought me into my womb and was like, you need to pay attention to this area and the wisdom here and listen to it. And so through the intensity and the wake up call of all of that, I feel like then I took it seriously after that. I realized that this was a cycle that needs to be paid attention to as a priority in my life and not just on the back burner, because I think, yeah, since we're first off taught to like disregard or feel shame around our cycle, it's not accounted for when we're planning for daily life or just, you know, so that's a lot of what this was about as well, is realizing like I do have the power to work with my cycle, and I do have a say in working with my life around it and communicating about it and giving myself the space for listening to it, but also using it for deeper things than just, it's more than just an experience. It can, when we work with it, it can be a channel, because we can tap into our deeper energies more. And so realizing the power and beauty in it instead of just the pain, I think was a big lesson in presence. And yeah, so many things, but that's a lot of the
So
core of it.
was this year of bleeding on the full moon, what was this happening before you wrote and published the Cycles Journal, or was it after you published
So this is kind of what sparked it. So I hadn't made it yet, but this was what made me realize I needed
it?
that. Yeah. So, and it also snapped me into like, oh, I need to have this all in one place so I can, because I think once I realized that, maybe like 6 months in or something to that, or maybe like even less, maybe like 3 or 4, because I generally would know when my cycle is coming, and but I would always notice the moon. And so the moon was kind of my anchor, because it was during a time where I wasn't paying enough attention to my body and my cycle. So being infatuated with the moon, because I've always been a night owl, and I've always just, nighttime is when I create. And so that's always when I would draw and stay up later than everyone else. So I would have my alone time because I'm such a solitary being. And so I feel like it's what really sparked it. And one night I literally, I started trying to create just like a simple version, but then I couldn't simplify. I was like, this has so many aspects and so many angles, and I need to like, it just like, my brain instantly realized, or maybe my womb instantly realized, that it was like something bigger than, and so I focused a lot of energy on it, and I kind of went into my hyper focus mode and just worked on it, started planning it and working on it all night, and then it became like a main project. And I soon after realized that it was something I wanted to like invest my time and energy and money into, whether like, I don't know if other people experience it this way, but when I get an idea that when it's, because it quickly transformed into something for more than just myself. I realized so quickly that although I needed this, I realized that it was for so much more than just me. And that's when my ideas always spiral, and an expansion of, when it's for more than just me, it feels really true, and I just dive into it and go with the flow of it. And I get very hyper focused when things like that happen.
I can certainly relate to that. I mean, it sounds like to me like you're describing my whole journey with the Womb Centered Healing Temple and the Herbal Womb Wellness Workbook and the apprenticeship program and all these things. It's like a prerequisite for me to feel like, well, no, because I'll do something that's just for me for sure.
Yeah.
But if I'm really going to put energy into something, I have to get a sense that others really want it. You know, I think some creators will just create something and then put it out there in hopes that somebody wants it. But I have multitudinous ideas of what I might want to create. But the thing that motivates me to actually put the energy into creating something is A, if I need it for myself, like you did for the workbook, right? And B, if somebody else says, I really wish, could you do this? Could, you know, either specifically to me or in general, somebody, and then I say, well, yeah, I've been planning on doing that. And then that gets it moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like it's a relational way of creating. It feels to me, I call myself a relational creator.
I like that.
Yeah, because that's what it feels like, and I've been really getting into that. That's why I call it too, writing from the womb, is a very much of a relational experience,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm in relationship with myself, in a partnership relationship. And I kind of wanted to speak to that, about this relationship between the mind, the thinking, logical thinking brain that's been so trained to be oriented towards productive work in the culture of producing products and profit, right? For, I mean, we can talk about where all that profit goes, because it's not necessarily for everyone to be profiting, right? But that we've been trained to just think in those logical thinking terms and plan our lives around that, and to disregard actually and suppress this whole other part of our brain, and our body brain, and the womb brain, the womb intelligence, right? That creative intelligence. We've been, trained to devalue that. And so that does create that war that you were talking about. And it sounds to me, and I'm curious about, in the process of creating this cycles journal that you needed for yourself, it sounds like things shifted for you as far as the degree of pain and intensity you might have been feeling in your cycle. And I'm curious if that was the main thing that created that shift for you, or if there were other things that you discovered for a womb healing process that helped to alleviate some of the intensity and pain that you were experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think mentality was a big part of it. I mean, I noticed significantly after that, once I stopped bleeding with the full moon, that it definitely like ended when I shifted mentally, and my pain decreased. And then even now, I notice when I can like almost predict the intensity of the cycle I'm going to have based on like how I treated myself and how I listened to myself leading up to that. And
Ooh, can we just, I just want to pluck that fruit right there and ask you to do share some specific examples of, okay, this month I treated myself in this specific way or that specific way, and it resulted in this type of menstrual cycle period or that type of period experience. Could you give us a specific little scenario?
Yeah. Gladly, I can tell you about my last cycle, because
Okay.
I mean, while there's a part of me that is, the part of ourselves that's hard on ourselves, and there's a part of me that has guilt that, or because I make this journal, I have to be perfect with my cycles, or that I've like mastered. Like some people think I'm like a cycle master. Like some people have said it to me. They're like, oh, like I have this question, like you're the cycle master. I'm like, that is so sweet, but I am not. I'm on this journey with all of you, and so is everyone else doing womb healing and womb work. So,
Exactly.
and I've been releasing that guilt, or like that expectation that I have to be perfect. So yes, so my last cycle.
Thank you.
I did not treat my body well, and because, well, I moved 2 months ago, so it's been a readjustment period. So the physical, labor, and just the stress of, I'm such a homebody that when my environment is not in the right place, it affects me. And also just the intensity of working. And although I do what I love for work, it's still labor, and it has, the boring administrative side, even though I get to make like art that I love, and that's exciting, so I've been intensely learning how to balance work and life. Like it's a never-ending journey. Who isn't still figuring it out? But or some people have it figured out, and I'm trying to figure out it for myself. So I'm trying to figure out how to say all this. Yeah, when I overwork, sometimes I don't nourish myself properly, and it's because I just get so invested. And it's like sometimes when I'm painting, I just forget to eat because I'm just so into the creative side, and but then, the hormones fluctuate and my body tells me that I haven't eaten enough, and then it's, a bit of a roller coaster. So not eating properly and sleeping, but then, if I forget an herbal remedy, then having stressful sleep, as well as not giving myself enough time for rest and pleasure. And just seeing that has kind of shown that then when I went into my cycle and I hadn't meal planned as much as I'd like to, or I hadn't maybe eaten the best foods for my body, and I also didn't, and sometimes, you know, it's like you plan for your cycle, even when I didn't plan fully, but then a family event came up that day, and it's just immediate family that we've been seeing, very limited people, you know, during COVID, and I was feeling fine in the morning, but then my cycle had actually come late, and I didn't listen to my inner voice that said I wanted space, which, you know, is still a practice of not only listening to myself and letting myself know that, but then communicating that to others and not feeling guilt when I cancel plans or when I pull back. So then, you know, went to the family thing, hadn't eaten the best because I was just craving, like, you know, like processed food. And then my body let me know very intensely that I wasn't listening. And so it was like, you know, even though I've been learning these lessons forever, it still happens. And instead of feeling shame about it, or, you know, at least I can process the shame I felt about it, I'm like, okay, this cycle, I'm going to listen. And so now, transcending from that, I'm in my luteal phase now. I'm descending. I'm going to bleed within the next week. And I've been very seriously like giving myself Reiki and downtime and setting boundaries around my work. And, you know, I can already kind of feel the shifts of like, from when my body starts aching and I do something about it, I do yoga, or stretch or dance, or when I start feeling that tension and sort of irritability within me, but then I take space and I feel like a million times better after. So it's like direct results from giving myself the space or the nourishment or what I need. And so, yeah. So I know this is going to be a better cycle.
Right. And it's such, I breathe a sigh of relief hearing you share how responsive our cycle is and our body is to the kind of loving care of just having our basic human needs met, that somehow as a society and as a collective we've strayed from that being a priority of having our basic needs met, right? And I totally get this getting into the creative process, because as visionary artistic beings, we can get on a mission. I mean, I certainly feel that of like, oh, there's all these people that need this and I'm inspired about it and I need this and I'm just gonna keep working on it and not rest and not eat and eat junk food that's quick, and I'm not gonna clean the house, and I'm just gonna not stop for my days off that I have set aside. I'm just gonna keep doing it, and because it's so, but that it's almost like it's sully. Well, it is like, it's not almost like, it is taking these visionary projects that we have and turning it into the same old.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Right? It's the same old. It's the thing that we're creating these things to heal. It turns them into the thing that we're trying to heal.
Oh my God.
Oh gosh. So this is really uncomfortable to be saying this for me, because I'm in the midst of it right now and I'm getting ready to move house and publishing my book for the first time too. So hearing your journey around that and the process of reclamation, that it's an ongoing thing, because there's so many things in the world that are telling us, oh no, you don't pay attention to what your body needs. Pay attention to this instead, or this is more important, yeah. So it's so good to hear you say that, and also that we can admit that just because we put a book out, it doesn't mean that we've mastered it. In fact, the opposite is usually the case, or often the case, because it means that I needed to write a book about it in order to get that, right? To get the message of it. And I need to keep, and yours is like a yearly thing where you're putting a new book out and revising it. And I'm kind of feeling like the herbal womb wellness workbook, it has like a planner part of it, but only 3 months worth. And I feel like I wanted to create a planner that has this depth of inclusion of the herbal womb wellness process that I'm sharing in the main book. You know what I'm saying? And yours definitely has some of that in it, but there's this, and so they would go really well together. I think that's why I wanted to get on here with you, is that, and I wanted to, like, I don't know, I'm thinking it might turn into more of a yearly thing too, because it's a workbook. So if somebody does it and then next year they want to do it again, well, they already filled it in with all the information from last year, right? So they may want to get it again. So it becomes this ongoing thing that's an ongoing nourishment of my healing process and your healing process, it feels like, which is very different than publishing a book once and then and then it's out there, and then writing the different book, right? Yeah. Well, so wonderful. So I would love also, the other question that came up when you were sharing about all of this is, I would love for you to share some practical tips for people who might be getting started, and for myself included, because I've used apps for tracking. I was never very good, and I've never really been very good at doing anything on a daily basis, like getting into a daily habit, even with spiritual practice. We're cyclical, right? We feel differently on different days. We need different things on different days. So I've always really felt that. And so I've never really developed the kind of daily practice where you do the same thing on every day. And I've learned to give myself permission that that's okay, that I just don't have that proclivity. However, for cycle tracking, right, it's not the same thing every day, but you do need to get into some kind of practical rhythm around it, or create some habit around it. And I'm curious how you navigate that for yourself, because sometimes you don't feel like sitting you're out there in the woods staring at the sky and listening to the birds, on that day, and you're not necessarily getting your journal out and making notes and in that kind of frame of mind. And so I'm curious how you've developed, because I imagine it didn't start out that every single day you were in there writing everything down, that there was an evolution about it, and that you learned some skills and some tips along the way that you might share with us about how to get started on the Cycles Journal journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this can apply to any sort of habit formation. I also am very much like that. I do what I feel. I'm as much as I try to enforce like structures that are helpful for myself, it's so hard to be, because none of us are just linear like that. But this has helped me. And while I am not perfect at it, I'm still learning. I have seen an evolvement with this. And that's also a big reason why I created it, is because first of all, the space that I am going to come back to every day and journal and track in, I feel like has to feel special and feel linked to myself. And that's part of why I made the journal physical and put my illustrations in there, and it has so much heart in it. So it's like an aesthetic sacred space, and that's what I wanted it to be, because when we use these if say we're using a chart that's not, it doesn't aesthetically link to us and connect to us, I feel like of course you'll still use it, and some people might just be good at using that, but I feel like then the layer of it feeling sacred and special and exciting can also help that. So that's the first link I have to Cycles Journal, and it being that it's more than just a journal and a tracker, but it's also a sacred space for you to ground and write all of your findings and reflect. And it is a holistic place, So I actually wrote a whole blog post on this too. It's on the site cyclesjournal.com, but I'll go into some of my biggest tips that helped me, and it's even in the journal as well. This year I put some of the tips. But so first of all, some days, yeah, you're not going to feel like it. And I think this is part of the lesson of being an ally to our body instead of fighting it, and giving yourself that grace on those days that sometimes you're just not going to feel like it. And what I do instead, instead of forcing myself on those days, is I'll either come back to it later, and a lot of times I'll remember like the very important or potent parts of those days, and I'll come back to it a day or two later and fill in what I remember, because the important stuff will stick. Or I'll like, if I'm not home and something comes up, or I didn't have my journal with me, I will keep like a little note on my phone so that I can then transfer it so that it's all in one place. Because I do bring my journal on trips and most places, but if I'm just like at the grocery store and something comes up, just still recording that, but putting that there later. And I think when we think of it as more of a ritual building habit instead of just a habit or a to-do, it's really an act of self-devotion. And just like any self-care habit we're trying to create or thing we're trying to do to improve our lives or our well-being, the more you do it and the more you realize it benefits you, and the more you become comfortable with it, the more it'll expand. So when we think of it that way, I think the mentality around it is important, and that's part of the journey. But some folks I know will also like, I think it can be helpful to have a sacred space for it. Like I keep mine with my altar and somewhere where I will just see it every day. And that's why I love it also being a physical tool, is because, when I use the apps, I think a big part of it for me, and I'm also not anti-app. I use apps too. I think they're great and they can be great companions. But when I just used an app, it got lost in my phone, or I would try the notifications and it was just overwhelm and too much for like, I felt like I was simultaneously in tech world. And so that's why it being a physical tool, I see it on my altar next to my bed, and it reminds me that that space is there. And it's almost like the same kind of reminder when your body's like trying to tell you something. It's like, oh, it's there, you should listen to it. But yeah, I think it's really a journey of that. And at minimum, I try to, if I can't like journal every day, I try to at least fill out the symptom tracking part, which this year especially, it's kind of a two-part. Every day when you go in, you go to the symptom tracking page, which is a monthly overview, and you fill in the bubbles based on your intensity of the symptoms you're experiencing. So that's a pretty like quick, rundown. You're like, did I have this today, this? And then you can go into the journaling part and kind of reflect more and write more. Or some folks will use that area for their planner as well, but it prompts you to go through like your physical, emotional, spiritual wellness and write about that more. So I always say if you can at least fill in the bubbles to do, to get your symptoms down, then that's, at least you'll have something to go off of. But
do you have like color coding, that you have different colored pens or to fill in the bubbles to indicate different intensity levels of the symptoms, or how does that work?
yeah, it's definitely a method you can do. I personally just use one color pen. And so there's a key at the bottom
Mm-hmm.
that shows, since they're all just open circles. And then the key kind of says like, I'll fill it in like halfway if it was like, I had it part of the day, or it was like moderate. I'll fill it in all the way if it was like intense or very present. And then I'll like dash it if it was like occasional, or like the key kind of shows.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So there's guidance in there. Okay, I hadn't looked at it in that close of detail yet. This new journal, it's not really starting till the end of
Yeah.
the month here. So, and I feel like so privileged to be able to talk with you about it, to get me all excited about starting. And aren't you having, um, aren't there going to be sort of online support group type activities and events coming up for people who are working with this journal to come together and support each other on the journey?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm doing a few things. So I'm really excited to be collaborating with Hara, who's the genderless witch on Instagram, and Gabe of Opulence House, and we created this really special container that um, I don't think we've announced this yet, but we're hoping to do quarterly. So the first one is this solstice, starting on the solstice, and it's an online summit where those who want to, yeah, come together in community, but also do some deeper work and work with folks who facilitate and hold space for womb healing and other self-care grounding activities. So we're holding that summit, and there's a free moon circle to start it off on the solstice, and it's kind of in honor of doing all of the work within this, because this is such an individual tool while we are simultaneously and all collectively healing through this and supporting one another through doing the individual work. It is, a tool you use at home, generally in solitude. So to have this other side of it that's more outward and community driven, but also helping you do the kind of the physical and energetic work that can accompany and complement this so greatly. So I'm really excited to be doing that. And I also have been toying with doing like just a walkthrough of how to use the journal, even though there are like how-to pages in the journal. It's always nice to watch someone do it and kind of talk about it. We all love videos. So I was thinking of hosting a live event, just a free like tune in and like learn about it and ask me any questions. So I think I'm going to be doing that either later this month or early January, whenever I have energy.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that. I know I'm planning similar things around the herbal womb wellness book, because that whole process, it can really help to have support around it and be able to have people to follow up with, well, what happened when you tried this and what happened when you tried that, and to be able to share in community. So I'm planning on having regular meetings around that, because there's like a monthly follow-up. Okay, we tried these herbal remedies and these practices, and what happened in your period, in your cycle this month, and then people can share and ask questions. Well, I tried this and that didn't really work for me, so what are other options? And just to have some follow-up and mutual support. So it's lovely. I just feel so attuned and aligned with what you're doing, and I'm really grateful you were able to come on and share with us. So can you just mention where people can purchase the book now if they haven't gotten their Cycles journal yet? I know I purchased it when you were having the Indiegogo campaign, but now there must be a place to just purchase it directly.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find it on cyclesjournal.com. So it's just right on there. You can also go through my Instagram, which is @cyclesjournal, and the products are also linked through there, or my link in bio. And yeah, you can also find my personal artwork at Rachael Amber on Rachael.Amber on Instagram, and Rachael is Rachael. Yeah, and I also have a free community Facebook group. If I'm not the biggest fan of Facebook, but I do love the connective aspect. So who knows, maybe someday it won't be on there, but for now it's just a group on there called Cyclical Nature, which you can also access through the website. It's under resources, and I made that just so we could all, like you were saying, share on our journeys and ask questions to one another, like just share experiences and support one another, because that is a huge part of it. We're all doing this individually, but we're not alone, and we all, it's so great to come together in resonance and support and have that community. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I'll put a link. I think I got a link from you about where to purchase the book too. So I'm going to put that in the show notes here for wherever your listeners are listening to this. You'll be able to find the link directly here in the show notes. So thank you so much once again for joining us, Rachael. And listeners also know that if you want to learn more about what's going on in the Womb-Centered Healing Temple and the Herbal Womb Wellness Workbook, you can find information about that on wombcenteredhealing.com. So thanks again, and that's all for now. Until next time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.